Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled deeper into the alien ship's engine compartment. The metal around him hummed with an energy he didn't recognize, but his hands knew machinery like a musician knew their instrument. 3 days ago, his salvage crew had found this vessel drifting dead in space near the asteroid belt. The captain had ordered him to strip anything valuable before they scrapped the hull. The ship's design made no sense to human eyes. Curved walls flowed like frozen water, and the control panel seemed grown rather than built. Strange symbols pulsed with faint blue light across every surface. But Marcus had spent 15 years fixing broken things in the depths of space, and broken was broken, regardless of who built it. His scanner beeped as it detected the fault. A massive power coupling had cracked, probably from some kind of impact. The energy core was intact but couldn't feed power to the engines. Marcus smiled. This was exactly the kind of problem he lived to solve. He pulled out his portable fusion welder and began working on the damaged coupling. The alien metal responded differently than human alloys, requiring him to adjust his technique. Sparks flew in colors he'd never seen before, casting dancing shadows on the strange walls around him. What Marcus didn't know was that his repairs were sending signals across subspace. Deep in the ship's systems, ancient communication arrays were coming back online. Emergency beacons that had been silent for months suddenly blazed to life, screaming their location across the galaxy. On a world 3 star systems away, massive creatures lifted their heads toward the sky. They had been waiting, searching, hoping for any sign of their lost explorers. The beings were 20 feet long from snout to tail, covered in scales that shifted color with their emotions. Powerful wings could carry them between worlds, and their intelligence rivaled any species in the known galaxy. The Draknari had been searching for the research vessel Starweaver for 6 months. It had vanished while studying a dangerous region of space where reality itself seemed unstable. Now suddenly its beacon was active again. Within minutes, 3 of their fastest ships launched toward the signal's source. Back in the engine room, Marcus had no idea he was being hunted. He worked steadily, his skilled hands bringing the alien systems back to life one component at a time. The ship's lights flickered on, and he heard the deep thrum of power flowing through conduits that had been cold and dead. He checked his chronometer. The salvage crew wouldn't return for another 6 hours. Plenty of time to finish the repairs and maybe figure out what this ship's cargo hold contained. Marcus had always been curious about alien technology, and this vessel was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The communication system crackled to life, filling the air with sounds that hurt his ears. Marcus winced and reached for the controls, trying to shut off what he assumed was some kind of automated distress signal. But the alien interface made no sense to him, and his attempts only seemed to make the noise louder. Unknown to him, his clumsy efforts were broadcasting his location, his species, and the fact that he was alone on the ship. The Draknari vessels now racing through hyperspace received every transmission. What they heard filled them with rage. Not only had someone stolen their missing ship, but the thief was actively tampering with their sacred technology. The Draknari were a proud warrior race, and this insult demanded immediate response. They pushed their engines beyond safe limits, determined to reach the signal before the criminal could escape. Marcus finally managed to silence the communication system, but damage was already done. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and moved deeper into the ship, drawn by the soft glow emanating from what looked like a laboratory. Strange specimens floated in preservation tanks, and complex instruments lined the walls. He was studying what appeared to be a 3-dimensional star chart when his salvage ship's proximity alarms began screaming. Marcus rushed to a viewport and felt his blood turn to ice. 3 sleek vessels were dropping out of hyperspace, their hulls glowing with weapon energy. The ships were beautiful and terrifying, shaped like massive arrowheads with wings that seemed to ripple in the starlight. Each one was easily 10 times the size of his small salvage vessel, and they moved with predatory grace that spoke of advanced technology and hostile intent. Marcus grabbed his communication device, trying to contact his crew but found only static. The alien ships were jamming all frequencies. He was trapped aboard a vessel he barely understood, facing enemies whose capabilities he could only guess at. As he watched through the viewport, cargo bays opened on the alien ships. What emerged made Marcus question his sanity. Massive creatures poured out into the vacuum of space, their scaled hides glittering in the starlight. They moved through space as easily as flying through atmosphere, propelled by some technology he couldn't comprehend. The dragons were coming for him, and Marcus realized with growing terror that he might have made the biggest mistake of his life. His simple repair job had just become a fight for survival against beings whose power and anger he was only beginning to understand. The first of the creatures landed on the hull above him with an impact that shook the entire ship. Marcus could hear scratching and tearing sounds as they began cutting their way inside. He looked around desperately, searching for anything that might serve as a weapon or hiding place. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was just one human mechanic, alone and outgunned, facing creatures that could cross the void of space with their bare claws. His only advantage was his knowledge of the ship's systems, knowledge that might be the key to survival if he could figure out how to use it. The hull above Marcus groaned and sparked as the creatures tore through the outer plating. He could hear multiple impacts now, suggesting at least 6 of the dragon-like beings had landed on the ship. Their claws scraped against metal with sounds that made his teeth ache. Marcus forced himself to think clearly despite the terror flooding his system. He was in the ship's laboratory section, surrounded by alien technology he didn't understand. But he was still a mechanic, and every machine had patterns, logic, and weaknesses, even alien ones. The lights flickered as the creature's entry damaged external power conduits. Marcus grabbed a portable light and began examining the laboratory equipment more carefully. One console showed what looked like atmospheric controls, with symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the ship's life support systems. A thunderous crash echoed through the ship as the first creature broke through the hull. Marcus could hear heavy footsteps moving through the corridors above, along with sounds that resembled angry growling mixed with what might have been speech. The beings were communicating, coordinating their search. Marcus noticed something interesting about the atmospheric display. The ship seemed to have multiple environment zones, each with different gas mixtures and pressure levels. His repair work had restored power to all systems, including ones that had been dormant. With growing excitement, he realized he might have stumbled onto something useful. The footsteps were getting closer. Marcus could hear the creatures moving methodically through the ship, checking each compartment. Their search pattern was efficient and professional, suggesting military training or extensive experience hunting in spacecraft. Working quickly, Marcus began experimenting with the atmospheric controls. The interface was intuitive once he understood the basic symbols. He found he could adjust oxygen levels, introduce various gases, and even alter pressure throughout different sections of the ship. A roar echoed through the corridor outside the laboratory. The sound was filled with such primal fury that Marcus stumbled backward, his hands shaking. Whatever these creatures were, they were beyond angry. They wanted blood, and his scent was probably all over the ship from his repair work. Marcus made a desperate decision. He began flooding the corridor outside with a mixture of gases that looked similar to what humans used for industrial welding. If his guess was right about the creatures needing oxygen, he might be able to slow them down or force them to retreat. The roaring outside became more agitated, followed by sounds of the creatures moving away from his section. Marcus allowed himself a moment of hope. Maybe his plan was working. But his relief was short-lived as new sounds reached his ears. The creatures were doing something to the ship's external hull, and the entire vessel began to shake. Through the laboratory's small viewport, Marcus could see one of the dragon creatures attached to the ship's outer surface. It was even more terrifying up close than he had imagined. 20 feet of muscle and scale, with 4 powerful limbs ending in claws that could tear through starship armor. Its head was roughly triangular, filled with teeth that gleamed like polished metal. But what struck Marcus most was the intelligence in its eyes. This wasn't some mindless beast. It was studying the ship's hull, looking for specific access points or weak spots. The creature was planning something, and Marcus had the sinking feeling it involved him specifically. The shaking intensified as more creatures attached themselves to the hull. Marcus realized they were trying to drag the entire ship somewhere, probably back to one of their vessels. Once they got him into their territory, his options would disappear completely. Fighting panic, Marcus turned back to the ship's controls. The repair work he'd done had restored more than just life support and communications. The navigation system was online, along with what appeared to be defensive systems. The ship had weapons, but the controls were completely alien to him. He began touching symbols randomly, hoping to activate something useful. The ship responded with various beeps and warnings, none of which he could understand. But one console began showing what looked like a schematic of the vessel's exterior. with red dots indicating where the creatures were attached. Marcus found himself holding his breath as he studied the display. If he was reading it correctly, there were 8 creatures on the hull, positioned at key structural points. They were working together to move the ship, demonstrating coordination that spoke of advanced intelligence and tactical training. But the display also showed something else. The ship had some kind of defensive measure built into its hull. Energy conduits ran throughout the outer plating, capable of delivering electrical charges to the surface. It was probably designed to clear away space debris or parasitic organisms, but it might work against his current problem. The question was whether he could activate the system without understanding the alien controls. Marcus began studying the symbols more carefully, looking for anything that resembled electrical or defensive indicators. The creatures outside were making progress, and he could feel the ship beginning to accelerate as they dragged it toward their vessels. One symbol caught his attention. It pulsed red and showed something that looked like lightning bolts emanating from the ship's outline. Marcus hesitated for only a moment before pressing it. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Brilliant energy cascaded across the ship's hull, and the creature's roars of surprise and pain echoed through the metal around him. Several of them released their grip and drifted away from the ship, their scales smoking from the electrical discharge. But Marcus's victory was short-lived. The remaining creatures, instead of retreating, seemed to become even more enraged. Their attacks on the hull intensified, and he could hear them tearing through armor plating with renewed fury. His defensive measure had worked, but it had also made them desperate. The ship shuddered as something massive impacted the hull near the laboratory. Through the viewport, Marcus could see one of the creatures had positioned itself directly outside, staring at him through the transparent metal. Its eyes burned with intelligence and hatred, and Marcus realized with growing terror that it knew exactly where he was hiding. The creature outside the viewport began making deliberate scratching motions on the hull, carving symbols into the metal with its claws. Marcus watched in fascination and horror as complex patterns emerged. The being wasn't just expressing rage, it was trying to communicate. Marcus pressed his hand against the viewport, studying the symbols. Some of them resembled mathematical concepts he recognized, while others were completely alien. But the patterns suggested intelligence far beyond what he had expected from what looked like spacefaring predators. The scratching stopped, and the creature tapped the hull 3 times with one claw. It was waiting for a response. Marcus realized this might be his only chance to establish some kind of dialogue before the situation escalated further. He looked around the laboratory and found what appeared to be a writing instrument among the alien equipment. Moving to a section of the lab's wall that had a smooth metal surface, Marcus began scratching his own symbols. He started with basic mathematics, the concept of prime numbers which any intelligent species should recognize. Then he moved to simple physics principles, showing his understanding of mass and energy relationships. The creature outside watched intently as Marcus worked. When he finished, it resumed its own scratching, adding new symbols that built upon what Marcus had written. The exchange continued for several minutes, with each party demonstrating their knowledge and intelligence. But the peaceful moment shattered when Marcus heard explosive sounds from other parts of the ship. The remaining creatures were still trying to break through the hull, and their efforts were becoming more destructive. The vessel shook violently as they breached the outer armor in multiple locations. The creature outside the viewport stopped its communication attempts and pressed itself against the transparent metal. Its eyes narrowed as it studied Marcus more carefully, taking in his human appearance, his clothing, and his equipment. Marcus could almost see the calculations happening behind those alien eyes. Suddenly, the creature began a new series of scratches, these ones more urgent and rapid. The symbols it carved seemed to be some kind of warning or instruction. Marcus tried to follow the meaning, but the complexity was beyond his understanding. The ship's internal atmosphere began to change. Marcus could feel pressure differences as the creature's hull breaches compromised the life support systems. Emergency lighting activated throughout the laboratory, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Marcus turned back to the ship's controls, realizing he needed to take more dramatic action. The atmospheric controls he had used earlier were still active, and he began studying the ship's internal layout more carefully. If he could isolate the areas where the creatures had broken through, he might be able to maintain life support in the rest of the vessel. Working quickly, Marcus began sealing off compromised sections and rerouting airflow to areas that were still intact. The ship's automated systems seemed to understand his intent and began assisting with damage control measures. Bulkheads sealed automatically, and backup power systems activated. The creature outside the viewport became more agitated as it watched Marcus work. It began tapping on the transparent metal with increasing urgency, apparently trying to get his attention. When Marcus looked up, the creature pointed toward one of its scratched symbols and then gestured toward other parts of the ship. Marcus studied the symbol more carefully. It resembled something that might represent danger or warning. The creature was trying to tell him something important, but the language barrier made understanding impossible. A new sound echoed through the ship, the distinctive whine of energy weapons charging. Marcus felt his blood freeze as he realized what was happening. The creatures weren't just trying to break in anymore. They were preparing to cut through the hull with weapons that could slice through starship armor like paper. The creature outside the viewport saw Marcus's expression change and nodded grimly. It pointed to the warning symbol again, then made cutting motions with its claws. The message was clear. The others were about to destroy the ship and Marcus was running out of time. Fighting panic, Marcus returned to the ship's controls with desperate urgency. There had to be some way to communicate with the attacking creatures, to make them understand that he wasn't their enemy. The ship's communication system was still active, but he had no idea how to use it effectively. He began activating every system he could identify, hoping something would provide a solution. The ship responded with a cascade of lights, sounds, and displays. Warning messages flashed across multiple screens, though their meaning remained mysterious to him. One console began showing what looked like external camera feeds. Marcus could see the creatures positioned around the ship's hull, their weapon systems glowing with deadly energy. They had surrounded the vessel completely and escape seemed impossible. But something else caught his attention on the display. The ship's cargo holds were showing full inventories, and some of the items appeared to be marked with the same symbols the creature outside had been scratching. Marcus realized with growing excitement that this vessel might have been carrying important cargo or research materials that belonged to these beings. He began accessing the cargo manifests, trying to understand what the ship had been transporting. The displays showed complex scientific equipment, research samples, and what appeared to be personal belongings. This wasn't just any alien vessel. It was someone's home and laboratory. The creature outside the viewport saw what Marcus was doing and became extremely animated. It pointed repeatedly at the cargo displays, then at itself, then back at the symbols it had scratched. The message was becoming clear. This ship belonged to these creatures, and Marcus had accidentally stolen something incredibly important to them. The energy weapon whining was reaching dangerous levels. Marcus could see through the external cameras that the attacking creatures were almost ready to fire. Once they began cutting through the hull, the ship's atmosphere would vent into space, and Marcus would have only minutes to live. In desperation, Marcus activated what appeared to be the ship's general communication system and began speaking aloud, hoping the universal translator protocols might work. He explained that he was just a mechanic, that he had found the ship drifting dead in space and that he had only been trying to repair it. The creature outside tilted its head, apparently receiving his transmission. Its eyes widened with what might have been surprise, and it began making rapid gestures toward the other creatures. The energy weapon charging sounds began to fade as the attacking beings received some kind of signal. The sudden silence was almost more terrifying than the weapon charging had been. Marcus watched through the external cameras as the creatures held perfectly still, their energy weapons powering down but remaining ready. The being outside his viewport was making complex gestures that seemed to be some form of rapid communication with its companions. Marcus could see their scaled hides shifting color, patterns flowing across their skin like living art. He realized this might be another form of communication, similar to how some Earth creatures used bioluminescence or color changes to convey information. The patterns were beautiful and complex, suggesting a sophisticated language system. The creature outside tapped the viewport again and pointed to Marcus, then made a series of careful gestures. It seemed to be asking questions, trying to understand who he was and what he was doing aboard their vessel. Marcus responded by pointing to himself and then to his tools, making repair motions with his hands. Understanding seemed to dawn in the creature's eyes. It turned toward the hull and began making new scratches, these ones forming what appeared to be technical diagrams. Marcus studied them carefully and realized the being was showing him the ship's power systems, including the exact location of the damage he had repaired. The creature pointed to the diagrams, then to Marcus, then back to the ship's internal displays that were still showing the restored power flow. Its meaning was becoming clear. It understood that Marcus had fixed their vessel rather than damaged it. But the revelation brought new complications. Through the external cameras, Marcus could see the other creatures becoming agitated again. Their color patterns were shifting to what appeared to be angry reds and oranges, and they were making gestures that seemed argumentative. The creature outside his viewport responded with its own color display, waves of cool blues and greens flowing across its scales. The exchange continued for several minutes, with different beings taking turns to communicate through their chromatic language. Marcus watched the debate with growing tension. He was clearly the subject of their discussion, but he had no way to understand their decision-making process. His fate was being decided by beings whose culture and motivations remained completely alien to him. During the discussion, Marcus noticed something important on the ship's internal displays. The laboratory around him wasn't just any research facility. It contained what appeared to be medical equipment and life support systems designed for the dragon creatures. This vessel might have been a medical research ship or even a hospital. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If this ship had been carrying injured or sick members of their species, his interference might have prevented critical medical treatment. No wonder they were so angry. From their perspective, he had stolen an ambulance. Marcus began frantically searching through the ship's medical displays, trying to understand what kind of patients or research the vessel had been supporting. The data was complex and alien, but certain patterns suggested biological monitoring systems and treatment protocols. The creature outside saw what Marcus was doing and pressed itself against the viewport with obvious excitement. It began pointing to specific medical displays and making urgent gestures. Marcus realized it was trying to tell him something crucial about the ship's medical mission. Working together through the transparent barrier, they began communicating about the ship's systems. The creature would point to a display, and Marcus would activate different controls until he found the right system. Slowly, they began to piece together the ship's true purpose. It wasn't just a research vessel. It was carrying critical medical supplies to a colony world where a plague was threatening the creature's species. The ship had been damaged by the same spatial anomalies that Marcus's crew had been investigating, leaving it drifting helplessly in space while an entire world waited for salvation. Marcus felt sick with understanding. His simple salvage operation had accidentally intercepted a mercy mission. The creatures weren't angry pirates or territorial warriors. They were desperate rescuers trying to save their own people. The communication outside was reaching some kind of conclusion. The creature at Marcus's viewport began making calming gestures toward its companions, its scales showing steady patterns of blue and green. Several of the other beings began moving away from their weapon positions, though they remained obviously suspicious. One of the largest creatures approached the viewport and studied Marcus intently. This being was clearly a leader, its scales showing complex patterns that seemed to indicate authority or high rank. When it spoke, the ship's communication system activated automatically, attempting to translate its words. The translation was rough and filled with gaps, but Marcus could make out the basic meaning. The leader was demanding to know Marcus's intentions regarding their medical cargo and whether he would interfere with their mission. To save the plague-stricken colony, Marcus activated the communication system and spoke clearly, explaining that he had no intention of stealing their medical supplies and that he wanted to help them complete their mission. He offered to continue repairing their ship and to use his own vessel's resources to assist their rescue operation. The leader's response was immediate and surprising. Through the broken translation, Marcus understood that they were willing to accept his help, but only if he proved his sincerity through actions rather than words. They wanted him to demonstrate his commitment to their mission. The creature at his viewport began showing him specific areas of the ship that still needed repair. The medical systems were functional, but the navigation and propulsion systems required additional work to get the vessel moving at full speed. Every hour of delay meant more deaths on the plague-stricken world. Marcus nodded his understanding and began gathering his tools. He would need to work quickly and efficiently to prove himself to these beings. But as he prepared to leave the laboratory, he realized he would need to work alongside creatures who could tear him apart with their bare claws. The leader seemed to understand his hesitation. It made a series of gestures that appeared to be some form of promise or oath, and the other creatures responded with similar displays. Marcus had no choice but to trust that they would honor whatever agreement they had just made. As he prepared to enter the ship's corridors where the creatures were waiting, Marcus reflected on how quickly his situation had changed. An hour ago, he had been fighting for his life against what he thought were alien predators. Now he was about to become part of a rescue mission that could save thousands of lives. The irony wasn't lost on him that his greatest challenge as a mechanic might not be fixing machines, but learning to work with beings whose very existence challenged everything he thought he knew about intelligence and cooperation in the universe. Marcus stepped into the corridor with his heart hammering against his ribs. The air was thick with an alien scent that reminded him of ozone and heated metal. 3 of the dragon creatures waited in the passageway, their massive forms filling the space from floor to ceiling. Up close, they were even more imposing than he had imagined. The largest creature, the one he assumed was the leader, approached slowly. Its movements were careful and deliberate, clearly designed not to startle him. When it spoke, the ship's translation system rendered its words in halting English. "Human mechanic Marcus," the translation came through. "You will repair navigation systems. We will assist. Colony world has perhaps 2 day cycles before plague becomes terminal for many thousands." Marcus nodded, though his mouth felt dry as sand. "I understand. Show me what needs to be fixed." The leader gestured toward a section of the ship Marcus hadn't explored yet. As they moved through the corridors, he became aware of the creatures' grace despite their size. They flowed through the passages like water, their clawed feet making almost no sound on the metal flooring. The navigation section was a disaster. The spatial anomalies that had crippled the ship had torn through the main computer cores, leaving twisted metal and fried circuitry scattered throughout the compartment. Marcus whistled low, a habit that made all 3 creatures tilt their heads curiously. "This is going to take everything I've got," Marcus said, more to himself than to his alien companions. One of the smaller creatures approached and began making gestures toward the damaged systems. Through a combination of pointing and basic translated words, it explained that the navigation computers contained critical information about safe passage through the spatial anomalies. Without that data, any ship attempting to reach the colony world would be destroyed. Marcus studied the damaged components carefully. This wasn't just a repair job. It was an archaeological dig through the wreckage of advanced technology. He would need to recover data from damaged storage devices and rebuild computational systems using parts that weren't designed to work together. The creatures watched intently as Marcus began, sorting through the debris. Their attention made him nervous at first, but he gradually realized they were genuinely interested in his techniques. When he began explaining what he was doing, they listened with obvious intelligence and curiosity. "Human engineering is different," the leader observed through the translator. "You adapt existing components for new purposes. Draknari engineering creates components specifically for each function." Marcus paused in his work. "Draknari? Is that what you call yourselves?" "Yes, we are Draknari. You are human. Your species is unknown to us, but your repair skills are remarkable." Working alongside the Draknari proved to be an unexpected education. Despite their fearsome appearance, they possessed sophisticated technical knowledge and an intuitive understanding of energy systems that complemented Marcus's mechanical expertise. When language barriers prevented clear communication, they developed a system of gestures and demonstrations that allowed them to work together. The smallest of the 3 creatures, who introduced itself as Kythera through the translator, showed Marcus how to interface with Draknari bio-neural circuits. The ship's computer systems were partially alive, growing and adapting like biological tissue. Marcus had never seen anything like it. "Your ship computers are alive?" Marcus asked as he carefully followed Kythera's instructions for connecting a replacement processing unit. "All advanced Draknari technology incorporates living components," Kythera explained. "Metal and flesh work together, more efficient than pure mechanical systems." Marcus found himself fascinated by the concept. The bio-neural circuits could repair minor damage automatically, and adapt to changing conditions in ways that purely electronic systems never could. But they also required completely different repair techniques, more like surgery than traditional mechanical work. Hours passed as they worked to rebuild the navigation system. Marcus's respect for Dragnari engineering grew with each component they restored. These beings had achieved a level of technological sophistication that integrated biology and mechanics in ways human science had never imagined. During a brief rest period, the leader approached Marcus with what appeared to be a ceremonial gesture. It placed one massive claw gently on Marcus's shoulder and spoke in its own language, bypassing the translator. Though Marcus couldn't understand the words, the tone conveyed respect and gratitude. "Leader Vorthak honors your commitment to saving our people," Kithara translated. "Among Dragnari, there is no higher praise than recognition for selfless service to others." Marcus felt warmth spread through his chest. "Tell him that any decent person would do the same thing." Kithara's scales rippled with what Marcus was learning to recognize as amusement. "Leader Vorthak says that assumption reveals much about human character. Many species would demand payment or advantage before offering assistance." The conversation was interrupted by alarms echoing through the ship. Through the external communication system, they could hear urgent messages from the Dragnari vessels that had originally pursued Marcus. The translation was fragmentary, but the urgency was unmistakable. "What's happening?" Marcus asked. Vorthak's response came through the translator with obvious tension. "Scout ships report spatial anomaly expansion. The dangerous region is growing larger. If we do not reach the colony within 18 hours, the safe passage route will be closed permanently." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. They had made good progress on the navigation system, but 18 hours wasn't nearly enough time to complete all the necessary repairs. The ship could probably limp to the colony world, but the journey would be dangerous and slow. "How far is it to the colony?" Marcus asked. 16 hours at full speed through safe passage," Kithara responded. "Perhaps 40 hours at reduced speed through dangerous space." Marcus stared at the partially repaired navigation system, his mind racing through possibilities. There might be another option, but it would require taking enormous risks with technology he barely understood. "What if we don't try to fully restore your navigation system?" Marcus said slowly. "What if we jury-rig a direct interface between your bioneural circuits and my ship's computer?" The three Dragnari exchanged rapid communications in their own language, their scales shifting through complex color patterns. Finally, Vorthak responded through the translator. "Such integration has never been attempted. The bioneural systems might reject foreign technology, or the hybrid system might fail during critical navigation moments." Marcus nodded grimly. "But if it works, we could combine the best aspects of both our technologies. Your bioneural adaptability with our computational speed and precision." Kithara moved closer to examine Marcus's portable computer interface. "The risk is enormous. If the hybrid system fails while we are traversing the spatial anomalies, both ships could be destroyed." Marcus met the creature's alien gaze. "And if we don't try, thousands of your people die from the plague. Sometimes you have to gamble everything on a crazy idea." The silence stretched for long moments as the Dragnari considered his proposal. Finally, Vorthak spoke with what the translator rendered as firm resolve. "We will attempt this hybrid solution. Show us how human and Dragnari technology can work as one." The next few hours became a desperate race against time and physics. Marcus worked with an intensity he had never experienced before, his hands moving through complex procedures while his mind calculated risks and possibilities. The three Dragnari proved to be excellent partners, anticipating his needs and providing technical assistance that no human crew could have matched. The hybrid interface they were building defied everything Marcus knew about computer integration. Kithara guided him through the delicate process of connecting human digital circuits to living Dragnari bioneural networks. The technology was so advanced it seemed like magic, requiring Marcus to think in entirely new ways about how information could be processed and transmitted. "The bioneural matrix is accepting the digital inputs," Kithara reported. Its scale showing patterns that Marcus had learned indicated cautious optimism. "But the integration is unstable. The living components are trying to adapt to your computational methods." Marcus monitored the data flow between the two systems, watching numbers and biological responses that fluctuated wildly as the technologies attempted to synchronize. "It's like watching two different species try to learn each other's language in real time." Vorthak observed the process with obvious fascination. Your species approaches technology as a tool to be controlled. Draknari approach technology as a partner to be cooperated with. This hybrid system must somehow accomplish both. The breakthrough came when Marcus realized he was thinking about the problem incorrectly. Instead of trying to force the two systems to work identically, he began creating translation protocols that allowed each system to maintain its natural operating methods while sharing critical information. "It's working," Marcus exclaimed as the hybrid interface stabilized. Data began flowing smoothly between the human and Draknari components, each system contributing its strengths to the overall navigation solution. But their celebration was short-lived. New alarms began sounding from the external communication systems, and the translation software rendered increasingly urgent messages from the Draknari scout ships. "The spatial anomalies are expanding faster than predicted," Vorthak translated the incoming reports. "We now have only 12 hours before the safe passage is completely blocked." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Even with the hybrid navigation system working, they still needed time to test it and ensure it could handle the dangerous journey ahead. 12 hours was cutting it impossibly close. "We need to start moving now," Marcus said. "Test the system during the journey." The third Draknari, who had introduced himself as Zefek, made sounds that the translator rendered as deep concern. Testing untried technology while navigating spatial anomalies could destroy both ships. "Perhaps we should attempt the slower route through stable space." Marcus shook his head. "The math doesn't work. Even if we survive the longer route, we'll arrive too late to help the colony. The plague will have already won." Vorthak studied the navigation displays showing the expanding danger zone. Its scales shifted through complex patterns that Marcus was beginning to recognize as the visual equivalent of intense thought. "Human Marcus raises valid concerns," Vorthak finally said. "But Zefek also speaks wisdom. How do we resolve this contradiction?" Marcus stared at the hybrid navigation system, an idea forming in his mind. It was crazy, possibly suicidal, but it might be their only chance to save both the ships and the colony. "What if we don't take both ships through the anomalies?" Marcus said slowly. "What if we transfer the medical supplies to my salvage vessel and use the hybrid system to navigate just one ship through the dangerous route?" The three Draknari exchanged rapid communications, their color patterns shifting through what appeared to be heated debate. Finally, Kithara spoke for the group. "Your salvage vessel is much smaller and more maneuverable than our research ship. It might survive passage through the anomalies more easily, but it cannot carry all the medical supplies needed for the colony." Marcus nodded. "We prioritize the most critical supplies. Save as many lives as possible with what we can carry." Vorthak approached the hybrid navigation system and began interfacing directly with the bio-neural components. Marcus watched in amazement as the creature's claws connected with living circuits, allowing direct mental communication with the ship's computer systems. The hybrid system calculates a 63% probability of successful navigation through the anomalous region, Vorthak reported, "higher than we have achieved with any previous technology." 63%, Marcus repeated. "Better odds than I usually get when I'm jury-rigging alien technology." Zefek made sounds that translated as laughter, human humor in the face of mortal danger. "Your species possesses remarkable psychological resilience." The decision made, they began the complex process of transferring critical medical supplies from the Draknari research vessel to Marcus's much smaller salvage ship. The cargo included bio-neural medical computers, living tissue samples for vaccine production, and treatment protocols that could save thousands of lives. During the transfer, Marcus learned more about the plague threatening the Draknari colony. It was an engineered bioweapon created by an enemy species during a war that had ended decades ago. The weapon had been dormant in the colony's ecosystem, only recently activated by environmental changes. "Your people are fighting a war?" Marcus asked as they secured the last of the medical containers. "We're fighting," Vorthak corrected. "The war ended 20 cycles ago, but weapons of that conflict continue to claim lives. This plague is one of many delayed consequences of that terrible time." Marcus felt a chill of recognition. Humans had their own history of creating weapons that continued killing long after the conflicts that spawned them had ended. It seemed that some aspects of intelligent behavior were unfortunately universal. The hybrid navigation system installation in Marcus's salvage ship took another 2 hours. The bio-neural components had to be carefully integrated with his ship's existing systems. creating a technological hybrid that had never existed before. As they worked, Marcus found himself developing genuine respect and affection for his Draknari companions. Despite their fearsome appearance, they possessed honor, intelligence, and compassion that reminded him of the best aspects of humanity. "If we survive this," Marcus said, as they completed the final system integrations, "I'd like to learn more about your people and your technology." Kithara's scales showed patterns that Marcus had learned indicated pleasure and agreement. "If we survive this, you will always be welcome among the Draknari. You have proven yourself worthy of our highest honors." Vorthak activated the hybrid navigation system and began plotting their course through the spatial anomalies. The route appeared on both human and Draknari displays, showing a path that threaded between reality distortions that could tear a ship apart at the molecular level. "Are you ready, human Marcus?" Vorthak asked as the final preparations were completed. Marcus strapped himself into his pilot's seat and watched the 3 Draknari secure themselves in positions throughout his small ship. The salvage vessel had never been designed to carry passengers of their size, but they had managed to adapt the available space. "Ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, his hands moving to the navigation controls. "Let's go save some lives." The journey into the spatial anomaly field began with deceptive calm. For the first few minutes, space around them appeared normal, with only slight distortions visible on the long-range sensors. But Marcus knew that appearances were deceiving in this region of space. The first anomaly hit them like a wall of twisted reality. Marcus watched in terror as the stars outside began stretching and bending, creating patterns that hurt his eyes to look at directly. The hybrid navigation system responded instantly, bio-neural circuits adapting to the changing conditions, while human computers calculated escape vectors with mechanical precision. Reality distortion at maximum intensity. Kithara reported from its position at the sensor station. "The hybrid system is compensating, but we are approaching its operational limits." Marcus fought to keep the ship steady, as space itself seemed to rebel against their presence. Through the viewports, he could see fragments of other vessels that had attempted this passage. Twisted metal sculptures that had once been functional spacecraft, now frozen in impossible geometric configurations. "How many ships have been lost trying to reach your colony?" Marcus asked through gritted teeth as he struggled with the controls. 17 vessels in the past 6 months, Vorthak replied, all equipped with standard Draknari navigation systems. None survived the anomaly field. The ship shuddered as another reality wave passed through them. Marcus felt his perception shift for a moment, experiencing the universe from perspectives that human consciousness wasn't designed to handle. The bio-neural components of the hybrid system seemed to buffer some of the effect, adapting to the alien physics in ways that pure mechanical systems never could. "The living circuits are learning," Zefik observed with obvious amazement. "They are developing new neural pathways to process the anomalous data. This adaptation speed is far beyond normal bio-neural capabilities." Marcus realized what was happening. The human digital components were providing computational stability that allowed the Draknari bio-neural networks to evolve more rapidly than they ever could alone. The hybrid system was becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. 2 hours to colony space, Marcus announced as he checked their progress. "But we've got at least 6 more anomaly clusters between here and there." The next cluster was worse than the first. Reality folded in on itself, creating recursive loops that threatened to trap them in an endless maze of twisted space-time. The hybrid navigation system struggled to find a path through the chaos, bio-neural components flickering with stress patterns, while human computers processed millions of calculations per second. "I'm reading temporal distortions," Marcus reported, watching his instruments with growing alarm. "Time is moving differently in various parts of the anomaly. We could exit this region minutes before we entered it or decades later." Vorthak's claws danced across the bio-neural interface, communicating directly with the living circuits. "The system recommends following the temporal gradient toward the most stable chronological flow. It will add distance to our journey but preserve causality." Marcus adjusted their course according to the hybrid system's recommendations, trusting alien technology he barely understood. The ship responded smoothly, threading between temporal distortions that could have erased them from history or trapped them in causal loops. "Your species shows remarkable adaptability," Kithara observed as Marcus navigated through a particularly complex anomaly. "Most beings require extensive training to work with bio-neural systems. You learned in hours what takes our engineers months to master. Marcus smiled grimly. Humans are good at making things work even when we don't fully understand them. Sometimes ignorance is an advantage. We don't know what's supposed to be impossible. The fourth anomaly cluster brought new challenges. Space became fluid, flowing like water around the ship while electromagnetic fields created aurora displays that danced across the hull. The hybrid navigation system adapted continuously, learning to predict the fluid dynamics of reality distortions. 1 hour to colony space, Marcus announced. But I'm reading massive power drain from the bioneural components. They're exhausting themselves trying to keep up with the anomaly adaptations. Vorthak studied the system displays with obvious concern. The living circuits are operating far beyond their design parameters. They may not survive much longer at this intensity. Marcus made a quick decision. Then we go faster. Push the engines beyond safety limits and trust the hybrid system to get us through before it burns out. The increased speed made navigation even more dangerous, but the bioneural components seemed to respond positively to the challenge. Instead of burning out, they began operating with an efficiency that amazed even the Draknari. Impossible, Zefek breathed, watching the system displays. The bioneural networks are exceeding theoretical maximum performance. They should have failed minutes ago. Marcus grinned as understanding dawned. They're not just adapting to the anomalies anymore. They're adapting to work with human technology. The digital components are teaching them new ways to process information. The final anomaly cluster was the most dangerous yet, a region where multiple reality distortions overlapped, creating a maze of impossible physics. But the hybrid navigation system had evolved beyond its original design, combining human computational power with Draknari bioneural adaptability in ways neither species had imagined possible. Colony space in visual range, Marcus announced as they burst through the final anomaly. And I'm reading massive communication traffic. The colony is still alive. The Draknari colony world appeared on their screens like a jewel against the darkness. Cities glowed across the continents and orbital platforms sparkled with the lights of civilization. But Marcus could also see the signs of distress. Medical ships in orbit. Emergency signals broadcasting on all frequencies. Medical facilities report 40,000 critical cases. Kythera translated the incoming communications. Plague progression faster than anticipated. Colony leadership requests immediate delivery of treatment protocols. Marcus began emergency landing procedures while his Draknari companions prepared the medical supplies for rapid deployment. The hybrid navigation system, its job complete, began shutting down gracefully as the bioneural components exhausted their enhanced capabilities. We made it, Marcus said softly as they entered the colony's atmosphere. We actually made it. Vorthak placed a massive claw gently on Marcus's shoulder. Not we, human Marcus. You made it. Without your skills and courage, this mission would have failed. 40,000 lives will continue because of your actions. The landing was smooth, and within minutes they were surrounded by Draknari medical teams rushing to collect the precious cargo. Marcus watched from the cockpit as his alien companions were reunited with their people, their scales showing joy patterns he had never seen before. Later, as the medical crisis began to stabilize thanks to the delivered treatments, Vorthak returned to the ship with an official delegation. The ceremony that followed was conducted in the ancient Draknari language, but Marcus understood its meaning without translation. He was being formally inducted into their society as an honored friend and ally. The bioneural interface components from their hybrid system were presented to him as gifts, along with the knowledge needed to integrate them with human technology. You came to us as a simple mechanic, Vorthak said through the translator. You leave as a bridge between our species. The hybrid technology we created together opens possibilities neither of our peoples could achieve alone. Marcus looked at the bioneural components, realizing their significance. This technology could revolutionize human space travel, making journeys through dangerous regions possible for the first time. But more importantly, it represented the beginning of true cooperation between humans and Draknari. What happens now? Marcus asked. Kythera's scales showed patterns of excited anticipation. Now we learn from each other. Your people have much to teach us about adaptability and innovation. We have much to share about bioneural integration and harmonic technology. As Marcus prepared to return to human space with his gifts and new knowledge, he reflected on how much had changed since he first entered the alien ship. He had started as a mechanic looking for salvage and had become an ambassador between species. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor about the roles people found themselves playing. But sometimes, Marcus thought as he watched Dragnari younglings play in the colony's parks, the universe's jokes had happy endings. The hybrid navigation system had done more than save 40,000 lives. It had proven that when different forms of intelligence worked together, they could accomplish impossible things. And in a galaxy full of dangers and wonders, that lesson might be the most valuable discovery of all.